Yeah, cool.
Works? Okay. So how are you? What have
I'm
you
good. Good seeing you after such a long time.
Yes. So what have you been up to these days? Since like the
Well,
lockdown
yeah,
started
I've
off.
been quite busy actually. I've been consulting with my clients,
Mm-hmm.
and I've also been taking some online classes
Okay,
all
okay.
over.
Okay. So you've been occupied throughout the lockdown.
Yes,
That's good. That's good.
it's quite a different experience. Actually, I think I had taken design research with you a couple of years ago, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So these days, when I take design research, it's not at all the same experience because students can't go out like y'all did. Y'all really went out for days together,
Yeah, yeah.
days and nights. They can't do that. So it's
So
all kind of within very restricted boundaries.
within the premises of their house or something like that.
Yeah, they have to choose some problem area within.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing is, I don't get to see the people's faces. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I don't know.
don't even know what more. There's so many students, and when you don't meet them personally, you don't really, there's no connection of the
Yeah,
sort there should be. So
yeah.
these are challenges that I think all of us are coming to grips with. Yeah.
So, Deepankar, I wanted to understand how you landed up in design and how did it
Yeah,
start off?
actually, it was very fortuitous because I had just finished school, and
Okay,
I was I had science. I had science in school with mathematics, so I was
okay.
going to do engineering. I was all set to do engineering.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw this little ad in the papers, talking about this institute called NID and starting their whole design thing. And I hadn't heard of design. Design was a completely new thing. But I decided to go and check it out.
Hmm.
And once I got to Ahmedabad and saw the place, I mean, I knew this was it for me. And I was very young. I was just 16 years old. I just turned 16.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was, stars in my eyes, and what I saw there, very, very impressive. From everything. I mean, the starting with the building. Of course, the building wasn't fully ready,
Hmm.
but a lot of it was, and I mean, the landscaping and all it's all in process. But
Hmm.
still, what I saw was very, very impressive. Then the people who I met with there, I saw the things that they were doing, and that fabulous equipment that they had there, all courtesy Ford Foundation. Absolutely brand new equipment.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
various workshops and all of that. Absolutely wonderful. So
And
I mean, I knew I was going to be there. I wanted to be there.
so you were in Ahmedabad back then when you went to check out the institute, or you were somewhere else
No,
based
no,
on?
I went to check out the institute from Delhi.
Oh, okay. You were in Delhi back then.
I was in
Otherwise,
Delhi,
okay.
but after I saw the ad,
Hmm.
I went to check it out.
And there was no resistance from your family or anything like that?
No, no, not at all. In fact, my father came along with me.
Oh, wow, that's great.
He came along with me. I mean, I was too young to, fully comprehend all of this anyway. 16
Mm-hmm.
is a bit young,
Yeah,
um, even in today's terms.
yes.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, my father was floored too, you know,
That's great.
with what he saw. So yeah, it was good all around.
So then you had an entrance exam of some sorts, and how was it like?
It was not so structured in those days.
Okay.
I just met with people and they gave me some basic exercises just to
Mm-hmm.
check out my, if I had any, sense of composition at all, a sense of color at all, and
Yeah.
they, just to see that if I wasn't color blind and, generally. But that was very, very rudimentary. It didn't take much time at all. And after
Okay.
that, it's just chatting with various people,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So it was also new. There was no structure, and I guess they were looking out for people who would, who would sort of fit in. So it was very, very, very,
Yeah.
open and it was candid and it's just a lot of chatting.
So,
Yeah.
were you into drawing or something like that since
No,
your
no, not
childhood?
at
Anything
all,
like
not
that?
at all. Absolutely
Nothing.
no.
Okay, okay.
Of course, my sense of composition, color, the visual sense, it was pretty well developed. I kind of was always very good in all of that. But
Okay.
I was from a science background, and physics and maths, along with
Mm.
English,
Mm.
these were my strong points. You know,
Right, right.
yeah, but you must realize, this whole thing about this drawing, I understand,
Mm.
but not in terms of making pretty pictures, but as a tool, as a tool to kind of solve problems or to express yourself, or even to, when you kind of, you've got an idea and you want to take it forward and you want to
Right.
develop it, then there's nothing really like drawing, which is something that one doesn't do in the conventional kind of education. That is
True,
too
true.
much too verbal, much too, it doesn't take into account your hand skills and what you can do with that part of your brain. Now,
Yeah.
yes, I was not very good at that at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
because it's something I hadn't ever done in school. But I
Right.
guess in the old days, at NID, they realized, they recognized that
Yeah,
they
yeah,
wouldn't have people who, I mean, you're talking of 1970,
yeah,
early
yeah.
70. So the school system was very rigid, much more rigid than now. Rigid in the sense it was too, analytical oriented and very little of the spatial stuff.
Mm,
That
mm.
today is better. I think these days is much better.
True. And also, I think the prior training before getting into college came along with in the later years when like coaching centers came up and people became more aware of
All of
how
that
the
started to
system
happen.
works and the
Yeah.
commercialization
As
of
a
it.
matter of fact, these days, what I see with the students, I think in a few years, what has happened is, and I think these coaching centers are really filling in a gap between what they teach you in school and what is required in a place like NID or a place like that. And in fact, if this carries on, I can very well foresee a time when the entire foundation program could very well be outsourced to these centers. I mean,
Right.
there are many places all over Europe where they don't actually have design schools, don't run a foundation
Yeah, they have
program.
another training program with a different set of people, I think, at least in terms of post grad, I've seen. Uh,
Yeah,
like if you've never done design and you're getting into a master's program in design,
yeah,
they'll get you with a different set of faculties, train you. So my
yeah.
yeah, makes sense. That can be outsourced completely.
Yeah, because I remember, there was a time when I was at MIT Institute of Design, and we were trying to align our courses with, one of those, places in the UK,
Hmm.
and we had to do it 1 year forward because they didn't run a foundation program.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
you know and that I believe is quite common there because their school system takes a lot of that into account. I mean, they do a lot of that in school, which we are beginning to do now.
Yeah, yeah. With the recent change in the policy,
Yeah,
might,
so a few
but
years
take
down the line, I suspect students will be not so rigid and not so totally analytical oriented. They'll be far more, their perceptions will be much more developed.
yeah, yeah.
Because the
And
whole foundation, we spend so much time in really learning to see and developing your sensibilities. The
mhm,
sensibilities which have to do with the senses. The seeing, the feeling, the working with the hands. Mainly because none of that really exists in the school system,
true, true.
not
But
in the way it should, at least.
yeah, but even with how we progressing with like now in couple of years we're going away from all that tactility and also really putting our heads into thinking or memorizing. So do you think that is sort of still required, some sort of a basic program at the institute?
You mean the memorizing thing in school?
In college, because I mean, how we're progressing, we might not even be aware of the senses, and I mean that's how I see it. I mean, kids would
Yeah.
be too technologically driven by the screens all the time, mostly, even the
Yeah.
education. Uh, so do you think that'll sort of require like a different way of tackling these students in
Yes, I think there are many issues over here. You see, after all, let us, if you take a slightly larger view of what education has been all about, the structured education, the way we have been going through, most of us, including your generation, has gone through, is
yeah.
really not very old. You know, it's about 150 to 200 years old. That kind of structure.
Mm-hmm.
And mind you, this has been attuned to the requirements of the whole industrial age. And what does that mean? That means that was the time when, the whole, all the fields of knowledge, were really becoming, getting into compartments, so to speak. There were specializations were beginning to
Specializing.
creep in. For example, you started having a distinction between economics and science and arts, and within science itself, physics, all that, because knowledge was becoming so vast, so big. That
Hmm.
specialization was beginning to happen earlier and earlier. Otherwise, you can hearken to a time when children wouldn't really, be so, looking at the whole world of knowledge in such narrow, compartment, in the area of such narrow compartments. You're learning, that's it, and which we, mind you, we are going back to, and a lot of
Yeah.
that comes from places like Finland, where, for example, they have dropped the whole idea of teaching subjects in school. What
Right.
they do is teach contexts. You start something from a context, and if that context requires you to, start to understand a bit of economics, start to understand a bit of geography, a bit of history, a bit of, whatever part of it, then all that sort of comes in. So through
Right.
your school years, you're not kind of learning subjects like we do in India, history, geography, and 5 years of this and 6 years of that. And that is something which is really a throwback from those requirements of the industrial age. And the whole idea of the sort of evaluation that age required was had a lot to do with memory, because you didn't have the kind of tools that's available to you today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so problem solving, in the sense that we do today, where, for example, innovation is much more important, that wasn't there. You needed to know how a problem was solved in an earlier time and place, which you could then adapt to your present circumstances, because rate of change wasn't so much. Any circumstances that you found yourself in wasn't going to be vastly different from what you found yourself in 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you didn't really have to think creatively. It was not necessary. So the
Hmm.
school system obviously prepared you for that kind of a world. And I mean, if you look at the workspace in those days, you got in at a certain level, and you hung in there for 30 odd years, and slowly through a series of whatever, you got to a certain level where you can say, okay, now I'm ready to retire. But what did you
Hmm.
do in those 30 odd years in the organization? Your requirement was to fulfill certain tasks
Hmm.
at various levels of management, or various levels of various levels of proficiency, especially in the factory situation.
Hmm. Hmm.
You handled complexity, but the complexity didn't change day to day, not like today a corporation can be defunct in 5 years.
Yeah.
From being number one, you can be number 80 in 5 years time. So unless you're thinking on your feet, and the whole corporation has got a culture of innovation, and looking out for new ways of doing stuff and new opportunities, you're sunk. So these are critical differences. And
Right.
I think that the whole what is happening with education, or what needs to happen with education, is basically this. Because frankly, my parents probably knew what the world will be like for me.
Yeah,
Not quite,
some
but
sense
there
of
is closer to
certainty.
knowing what the
Yeah,
world will be like for me than I have for my children. I
right.
have no idea what you guys are going to be doing in 5 years' time. You don't have an idea what you're going to be doing.
Yeah,
Half the professions which are in existence today will be gone,
true,
and
true.
we do not know what's going to take their place. Just look at the last 20 years. I mean, you guys may find it difficult to comprehend, but we didn't have email. We didn't have a portable telephone. We didn't have a computer like this.
It's a different pace of life altogether, and the
Yeah,
way of living also. Yeah.
exactly. So, given all of that, I mean, idea of education, education is connected to, what the world is like. It's
Hmm.
not something out there becomes an ivory tower and, you just learn the subject. If you're doing research, pure research, yes, but not at the
Yeah.
level of school and not at the level of, till the graduation level, certainly not, most probably.
Hmm.
Perhaps
Hmm.
post-graduation level and, the doctoral level, you can get into a one groove and take that further. The whole idea of research is that
Yeah.
that's an ivory tower is pretty good there.
But when do you think it started changing? Things started changing the way in terms of the pace and technology drastically.
Yeah.
And when do you think it?
I think the shift from the industrial age to the post-industrial age, which we are in today,
Mhm.
is what made a lot of difference. Because the post-industrial age, or where information and communication plays a much larger role, change the fundamentals of how things work. To give you an example,
Yeah.
in terms of the corporation itself, right up to the 90s,
Hmm.
the biggest asset that a corporation had was its physical assets. If
Right.
you're a
Right.
manufacturing unit, it's your factories. But
Hmm.
the moment you had the internet, and moment you could sort of outsource manufacture and many of the back end managerial processes, what happens? You see, in the old days, the quality of the product depended very much on the technology and the processes that you had in your own factory.
Yeah.
And that gave you an edge in the marketplace. But moment corporations started to outsource all these functions, everybody, including your competition, is getting things manufactured in almost the same place, which is Taiwan, China, whatever,
Hmm.
what have you, who would become specialists, in this whole thing. So for example, a product at a certain price point, whether it comes from Whirlpool or LG or Samsung, etc., there's very little in terms of quality that's different out there. So the
Hmm.
difference is somewhere else. And this difference has shifted from the quality of the product or the amount of technology that the product had access to somewhere else.
To the
These have a lot
intangible
to
part
do
of it.
with what the designers were doing. Because at one point, for a corporation, the physical assets were not really worth all that much in terms of the value of the corporation. But its
Hmm.
brand became terribly important. So,
Yeah.
for example, if you are going to try and buy out Coca Cola tomorrow,
Hmm.
its brand value is really those millions and millions and billions of dollars. They don't
So
have to sell you any physical
yeah.
assets at all
So we had the shift from like physical to this intangible part of the
to
brand.
the intangible. And mind you, you could see this shift everywhere in terms of processes. For example, how do you do distribution? These days, distribution, for example, large mega stores,
Hmm.
whole thing of keeping inventory as to when you should order a certain product is probably has nothing to do with any human being out there. Their
Right.
systems read that the number of products within the establishment has gone below a certain level, and they process it. They would place an order for it. and that would start another process somewhere else, and get developed. So this whole thing about just-in-time delivery, and just-in-time inventory, all of these were dependent on having that kind of information and communication processes built into the system. And
Right.
all this really happened because of the internet, because of the post-industrial thing driven by information and communication. Everybody's got laptops and computers. People don't have to be, in a corporation, people don't have to be in one place anymore.
Hmm.
Many functions are happening where people are in different locations,
Yeah.
and the corporate headquarters is becoming very, very lean. It's not like a huge campus with lots of the factories, this, that, everything in one place. It's not like that anymore. You just have a bunch of guys, half the management processes are outsourced. All
Yeah.
the back end office stuff is outsourced. I mean, everything, billing is outsourced. Taking orders is outsourced. Looking at after sales is outsourced.
So all that remains is just the
And on the
brand
other side,
value.
manufacturing is outsourced, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just imagine how much flexibility it gives you as a corporation. You're
True.
really going after the places which offer you best value for money. And you can afford to be really lean. And you can look at other things. So that's the place where innovation becomes becomes key to staying alive. And remember, everybody's doing that. And the other big thing from the user point of view, in the old days with the systems that we had in place, the basic key to running that system was you had corporations which would manufacture stuff, and you would have advertisers who would pursue the user to buy the stuff. That was how it generally worked. So these guys came up with something which they thought they will work, and the advertisers would convince everyone else to kind of buy it.
It was more producer driven back then.
Yeah, that is why they were called consumers.
Yes.
You
Yes.
consume.
Right.
Now this changed. Now one of the reasons for this change was this whole process was a one-way communication from the corporation to the users. It was not an interactive space because the user couldn't get back. With the advent of social media, users have as much as a voice in this whole process as the corporation. So the brand here, now that is why the understanding of brand changes. It is not something that the corporation controls, but it's more of an interactive space which kind of grows because of the kind of interaction, because between everything that has to do with the corporation and everything that has to do with potential users. So it's a much more livelier, much more open-ended space with much fewer controls. So this is another big, huge thing. And it is at this time that corporations, in the old days, it's usually really the ops guy, the engineering guy, and the finance guy, used to run the shop, call the shots. And the board was really chock full of these guys. And all of a sudden they said, yeah, things are changing. And who do we have in this organization who understands people? Because all of a sudden people are getting more, pretty important. And then somebody remembered, oh, there's a design team out there and they've been dealing with people all their lives. So let's try and get them into, the whole. And that is the beginning of what is called design thinking. What is
Right.
happening in design thinking is some of the processes that designers had been honing for the past 80, 70, 80 years,
Hmm.
the other guys, began to see some value in it. So that is why we call them user-centered processes. And design thinking is really incorporating user-centered processes with other disciplines and
Hmm.
try to
Hmm.
incorporate within the organization. That is what design thinking means.
Yeah.
you know what we used to use, the whole I think about getting user, the way we work with users, it's not really data, like it's not in words, and it's not, we observe, we take pictures, we have a lot of conversations. It's much more sensory, it's much more
Very,
emotional.
very qualitative that way.
Yeah, qualitative. Now that kind of a thing, these guys, these suits, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? They would be horrified, because they didn't understand it. Even now, they don't understand it so much, but at least they have a respect for it. They are beginning to see the value of it.
Mm.
In response to all this, you had Stanford University, which came up about 20 years ago with the D School. Now, the D
Mm.
School in Stanford University is anybody who's joined Stanford gets an automatic entry into the D School. So
Yeah.
everybody is doing a bit of design thinking. And you can
Yeah.
take modules, you can do 1 week modules, 2 weeks. Some guys hanging out for 2 years, 3 years, no problem. So this resulted in a whole bunch of guys in corporate America who kind of knew what design
This thing.
was all about. And on the practical side, on the you had IDEO, where design teams are very, very multidisciplinary. I think I showed you some videos.
Yeah. The
Remember
shopping cart, I
that
think.
thing? Yeah. So you have this, in a team of 10, 12 people, you would have a psychologist, a management guy, and engineer, a linguist, or what have you, and maybe one designer, maybe. Now, the designer is not the essential guy there because the process has become embedded in the team.
Right.
So, in that sense, a design school training is probably not going to be necessary, down the years, because everyone else would have. I mean, what is it that designer has the others don't have? One critical thing is this whole, understanding emotions and playing with emotions. The whole around with quality, which is, and be comfortable with ambiguity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Understanding user-centered processes and the iterative way that we work.
Hmm.
We never know while solving a problem, the problem is getting clear to us. It's not like the engineers who have to know what they're doing before they even start.
Right.
The
Right.
engineers got to know that this is what I'm going to be doing, and then I start from here and try to get there. Designers
Whereas
don't
we
work like
figure
that.
out on the way through the process what the
Yeah, we
problem is.
discover as we go along,
Yes.
you know. And like I love to mention, it's like a surgeon cutting you up where your liver is, and then halfway through the guy says, "Oh my goodness, this isn't looking so good. I think little higher up, let's make another incision." Designers do this all the time. We are constantly going here, there, and the other, and voila! Each time we do this, it's a little better than the earlier one. Little better than the earlier one. That is why these rapid prototypings and all these sketches we make. Until at one point we've got something that goodness has nailed it.
Hmm.
Then
Hmm.
we go back through a repeated series of interactions with the target groups, get their feedback, and develop the process again until we've got something that can go into production. Now, this process is so different from the normal engineering processes that used to be there in the old days. And this
True.
is the huge contribution that I think designers or design thinking has made to corporate processes, organizational processes.
Right. Right. So when you came out of the institute, was there a recognition for designers per se, or
No, no, we are. My training has been completely old school. We didn't think in terms
which
of
discipline?
multidisciplinary anything. We
Okay.
thought we used to be in our little design offices, and thought we were the custodians of good taste,
Mhm.
and good sense. If I haven't got it right, if the janta cannot get it right, the janta doesn't know. The janta is going to lap up what I give them, and I've been trained that way because the corporations required that kind of a guy. The corporations were doing the same thing. They were making stuff which would be lapped up by the consumer. So they needed guys. That's why you had this age of the big names. Today you can't have designers who would get such fame, anymore. Because design is no longer like that. It's not an individual activity anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
It's
is
much more decentralized. Much.
the user is part of the process.
Hmm.
And this is what gave rise to these movements of user-centered design, co-design, co-design, the whole processes of co-design, where right from the beginning you have these users sitting in your office, and you're working with
Right.
them at each stage. In the old days, we used to have a kind of a finished thing. We would three variations. We would go to the client and sell it to them. If you could sell it in first shot, great. If you can't sell in the value, you went back. And there were two other, three other, of your competitors trying to do the same thing. Today it doesn't work like that. Today you hire me, and I'm going to have a series of chats with you before
Hmm.
I even begin to finalize the contours of the problem statement, right? And
Right.
then I think about making some. The presentations will be very rudimentary, where we can start a conversation. Now, these are some of the things that my generation started years and years ago, because we realized that we are not going to be able, it doesn't work really to take a client's brief and start from there. Because many times we saw that the client's brief has been produced by people who had no idea what we were talking about. The whole qualitative
Right.
thing. It was
Right.
very, quantitative oriented. So we
Hmm.
knew we had to revisit the brief itself. And that usually meant us going in and hanging out with the client for 3 to 6 months, which we began to do. I mean, my generation, my group, my batchmates, began this quite early in the game. But today it's become part of your process. And I mean, even the clients understand it. You know? So
Right.
these are fundamental ways in which everything has changed.
Okay. Okay. So, what's the process like when you meet a client now, and can you take us through a process with any of your personal experiences?
Yeah. For example, in the old days, you started off with trying to formulate a problem statement. Now that problem statement was hugely dependent on what you perceived the client's needs to be.
Hmm.
We did not ever go down like you guys do, spend hours and hours trying to remember what we did in design research.
Yeah.
you know Days and days trying to really work on user generated data.
Right. Right.
We didn't do that. you know we didn't use user generated data. We used data that came to us through our education, through our learning, through what the psychologists told us, through what the sociologists told us, and through what our study of the competition and various products in that category look like.
Hmm. Hmm.
So most of the data came from there, and then we would make something which everyone would think would work. The corporation would be convinced, and they would run a test run and see what the user where it's going. And mind you, the competition wasn't like today. You could take
Hmm.
months to get a product off the ground. Today you have to get 5 products off the ground in 6 months because your competition is doing the same. The models keep
And you
changing.
you can't really take the risk of experimenting as well. There's no scope for that. You
Yeah.
have to get it
And the
right.
other thing is, in the old days, you made one model and that lasted 2, 3 years. Today, you make one model for different demographics because we know that different users require different things. So, for example, if Nokia comes out with a phone today, they're going to make 5 variations because
Right.
they want to tap into those 5 segments. In the old days, we didn't do that. We made one, and we wanted you to go gaga over it.
So was it because we didn't see that there was a stark difference in the kind of demographics, or was it because it wasn't that user driven that much back then?
I think it's also due to the markets having become more mature, and users you
Right.
know, demanding more. And because the competition is there, they are able to demand much more. They are able to
They're more
express what they
power
want.
in them. Yeah.
And I think it leads, and also with time, I think this whole 3D manufacture, you
Hmm.
will probably be able to see a time when manufacture will not require so much of the kind of investments we have today. So customized solutions will be more prevalent, and this is also aided by the fact that in the old days products were very physical. The tangible was very important. So for
Right.
example, today is not. Today is the user interface which is much more important, simply because the whole thing has become digitized.
Yeah.
When I was your age, we would actually be learning to do a phone, a computer, a sound system. All they're all separate things. And so, we would spend hours and hours working on things like the radii, the form of the actual product.
Hmm.
Today, it's a little black box, which is pretty formless actually. And it becomes a phone, it becomes a camera, it becomes a computer, it becomes what have you. I mean, how many variations of the little black box are you going to make anyway?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
design has shifted from that form, from the physical form, to what it delivers. You see, we used to use the physical form to deliver a certain function.
True.
That's what form is all about.
Yeah.
It delivers a certain function, right? So we concentrated on that form to deliver certain functions, and those functions were not just in terms of what the thing could do, but in terms of its aesthetic functions, in terms of its user sense, ergonomic functions, cognitive
Hmm.
functions. All of those were functions, and we were producing this stuff which could kind of gel into all of that. But today you can get into that function space bypassing the physicality of the product because you've shifted that whole thing into the digital space. Working with the UI gets you right there at the heart of the functional space. And you are latched on to the cognitive, elements of design straight away. So
Right.
when you're making a wireframe and mucking around there, what are you doing? You are interacting with the cognitive, stuff that your users, or from various demographics, from various age groups, from various whatever, are going to be involved with. Because if you look at design is what at the end of the day? It's nice to start with certain examples. For example, I would say design is that quality, that turns a, an engineering, a complex piece of engineering like the metro system
Hmm.
into something that a 5-year-old can negotiate or an 80-year-old person can negotiate. How does this happen? That quality is, to my mind, design. Design is all out there. And the
So
shift, to some extent,
negotiate as in like I can you elaborate? I couldn't get you there.
I mean, just look, take a look at a metro.
Yeah.
Take out all the design elements from there, which is really all the signages you take out, all the comfort levels of, how you traverse the whole place, take out all the design elements. What you're left with is the bare bones of an engineering masterpiece, you know. But
Right.
you put a human being in there, would you know what to do?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
You know,
So
that,
so
so that quality of that whole thing, designers work in that space. And we know that that space is incredibly complex. Just look at the international airport in Mumbai. The
yeah.
number of people who pass through that space, of different kinds, the number of operations that are happening there simultaneously in terms of the freight, the people, the movement, the aircraft. I mean, it's pretty bloody complex stuff, and it's all what? It's all humans vis-a-vis all these functions. That's got to happen, right? That's
Right.
without the
So
design, that
hmm.
place would be chaotic. It would be impossible. You know,
So do you think the complexity has sort of changed over these years? As in
Pardon? I can't hear you too well.
uh can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was saying that do you think the complexity of these problems as the years pass by is becoming like it's becoming more and more complicated in terms of the problems?
Yeah,
Or
I think design is going to be changing focus to a great extent. I mean, we have come from manipulation of the physical, which was really the domain of crafts.
right,
So that is why you can trace the beginnings of modern design to craft, because they were the ones who were making physical product which would perform certain functions for the user.
hmm.
He started there, and through various processes, went through the process of the whole industrial design to now the post-industrial design. And I think you can very well envisage a future, which is really built of algorithms and sensors. I walk into a room, and the sensors and the algos would really know how much light to put in there, would
Yeah.
really know how to control the temperatures, would probably start to provide me entertainment.
Hmm.
So it's unlikely that you would need discrete products anymore. That whole thing is the UI space.
Right. Right.
So me and that habitat, I'm interacting with that habitat, and the UI is built into that. Many of the things there. And which where really my mind is tapped into it. I walk into that space and my mind is tapped into it.
Right.
Right now
That.
UI is pretty rudimentary. I still have to use my fingers to get there, but
Hmm.
I can imagine a place not very far from the future. I won't need to.
We're already there, I think, and
It's
with
already
like
there, the technology
Google
is there.
Home, Alexa, and even like Internet of Things, like everything's just, yeah,
Absolutely.
we're pretty much getting
Absolutely.
there.
So
We just
design there. Now it's the next stage. And what are we doing? You see, in my youth, we worked on the physical form, which delivered the function. You
Mhm.
guys have jumped straight into the function space. You don't need to work with the physical stuff. The next
Hmm.
stage is to get not just in the function space, but in the cognitive space, and work
Right.
only in the cognitive space. So there you're working with in the area of human vis-a-vis all of these things at the level of the mind.
Right, right. So, Deepankar, how do you think like you've been teaching for so long and
Yeah.
you've been part of this system for so long? Do you think we're changing with that? Like the education is adapting to that and changing our ways of thinking about
See,
how we
in
need
bits
these
and
things?
pieces, most designers, practitioners, as well as educators are far behind the curve.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing catch up. There are many old timers who are barely catching up to the requirements of today. You know, I'm so glad you guys don't have a 4 week course on manipulation, radii manipulation.
Radii manipulation is physically altering the form and like on a
the the, the,
drafting table.
the complex corners. You have a small course, you
We
have a
did
छोटा
have
course, but for
analytical
us it's
drawing
a
course.
full 4 week stuff, huh? Because we dealt with that stuff. That is what we did. We made these physical products. You guys are concentrating a little more on the UI, UX, the wireframes, all of that. The next generation is going to be the whole design curriculum. The way I see it is going to be in the cognitive space. You know, that's really mind-machine interface. You're going to be designing experiences in the mind-machine interface. You see,
Right.
all all progress is like this. Most of the system, catches up, fatak say, or tries to. And today the thing is so fast that you bet. And there are some people who are, I'm happiest today. In my whole, I'm 66 years old today, and now, and I'm happiest today. It used to be a pain, all these things doing my hand, and I was never very happy. Today I'm much happier because what I think is more attuned to this. And there are
Right.
guys who are far ahead of me, in the cognitive, in that sense, in the sense they're already in that cognitive space, and they're designing stuff in the cognitive space. And there are some institutions around the world
Yeah.
which is more there than other places. In India, institutions are really really stuck. Most of the NIDs are still, I think, very very stuck, and
Mm-hmm.
other places are even more stuck. And I think there's a fundamental problem about the way things work. Because, for example, NID for a long time, concentrated so much on visual qualities. The reason is the beginnings of design had a lot to do with the visual quality, the whole idea of aesthetics.
Hmm.
So user-centered data for aesthetics was a horrifying thing for most of the old-time designers. You mean you want parrot green? They would like, or if
Yeah.
any student dares to use things like parrot green and stuff like that, because they had the sensibilities coming in from the European sense of color and stuff like that, and our sense of color is complete. Nobody ever thought of the Indian context so much. These are all chaps, it is Eurocentric education that they had received, and they opened their eyes and said, "My goodness, it's so beautiful." And they said, "We're going to screw it all out and train our students to do this. Anyone goes out of line, and he's going to be in trouble." They would make the students fall in line to that sense of what they considered aesthetically okay. So you had a bunch of designers came out in the marketplace who would be spewing out the same thing.
Right.
Everybody got wiped out in the 21st century, simply because of this user-centered stuff going on, And one guy from a small village outside Chennai, he says, "Nahi ji, we want lungi. You better give me lungi." So designers have got to give him lungi. Yeah. You can't ask me to put on trousers.
Right. Right.
And same thing across the board. I mean, communications. You know, I'm sure some of your mates are also doing the same thing because they're taught that way. You make some sort of a thing and they would put it up. There's something called visual language. Now,
Yeah.
what does visual language? Does a visual language have a cultural basis or not?
It does.
The visual language that these guys are taught are Eurocentric visual languages. It's like going out there talking to a villager in French.
Pointless. I mean. Yeah.
You're talking to him in French because that visual thing that you're presenting comes from a
Yeah.
Eurocentric. I mean, because that's where our you know teachers and the teachers' teachers learned it. You know,
Yeah. They went and trained in Germany or other European countries.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, in that sense, to ask ourselves, has design come into its own in India? It is a question I keep asking myself. And mind you, I'm not a recent convert. I'm a pretty old convert because I was dissatisfied with this, and I did ask a lot of questions at NID, but I fell in line. At one point, by the time I was through with that place, I'd been quite totally brainwashed in the Eurocentric mode until I hit the bazaars of Mumbai.
Bazaar.
I said, "My goodness, am I going to bring in my Basel, the Swiss graphics that I had become such an expert at, And I was going to put that up in this bazaars of Mumbai. I mean, it's incongruous. That's when I started getting my ass kicked and I started opening my mind. I said, no, this won't work. We got to start to look at what quality means over here. Because for me, the idea of quality at that time was
Mhm.
some objective idea of what quality is.
Right. Right.
But you realize soon enough that quality is a very subjective thing. The idea of quality has very much to do with the person who is actually practicing that, whatever it is. Whether it be in terms of products, whether it be in terms of service, whether it be in terms of communication, the perceived quality, a part of it comes out of the designer's office, but a major part of it comes out of the user's perception of it.
Right. So I'm gonna jump in here. So when you say that uh, there's going to be an Indian essence to it, uh, but is can there be such a wide generalization to Indian design, or because a person living in Chennai wearing a lungi or a mundu will have his own set of requirements, needs with the climate and all that, whereas somebody living in Pune or anywhere else will have its own requirements. So, uh, in that sense, then we can't. Can we say that there can be anything like Indian design, or that's something that's coming from somewhere else, like Indian
Yeah.
design? What do you
Yeah.
think?
No, this is a question that I think all of us needs to think about, and it's a continuous process. For instance, it seems to me that if everything is so subjective, if the whole idea is so subjective, look at some of the roots of it. The whole most of Eurocentric the whole system there. What gives rise to what is called modernism,
Hmm.
or modernity, or the modern world, is very the foundation, the philosophical foundations, can be traced to Aristotle and the Greeks, isn't it? Their whole
Yeah,
understanding of time and space, is really there. But if you look at the way, time and space is perceived by, let's say, some of the Eastern cultures, the
very different.
Hindus, the Buddhists, the Zen.
It becomes cyclical, whereas it's very
Not just
linear.
cyclic. It is,
Oh,
for instance, in our philosophy, you can have series of events out there, simultaneously. It's kind of out there. It's not that
huh.
one follows another and this
Right.
happens and that happens. So the whole mechanics of it isn't really a cause and effect so much. you know
Yeah.
that is why we've got this attitude. What they might find really funny, they might call it, you got a fatalistic attitude, or they might think, that you guys have no concept of what time is. For you, half an hour doesn't matter. It truly doesn't. What are you guys getting so heated under your collar about it? Those Europeans, if it means 9:30, means 9:29, that guy will be there,
Hmm.
and he'll be there for 2 minutes. After that, he gets, he's going to get a panic attack. While for us, he said, "ठीक है, मिलेंगे यार." And then milenge means it may be 5 years down the line. Milenge yaar, right? But for
Yeah.
those days, milenge means when, what time, kab, tomorrow, day after, when, please specify.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We don't work like that here. And what about things like, what is aesthetically pleasing? What is sensorily, what is pleasing to my senses? you know some of the ways, if you look at some of the homes in India, at the
Hmm.
village level, at the small time level, a small town level, you know you look at there and designers go aghast and say garish colors hai, in terms of how the information is structured. No concept of, the hierarchy of information is not there. What is important, frankly, to the Indian mind, maybe it is not important. We
Right.
do not make up our minds to say that this bit of information is more important than that bit of information. And what they're expressing out there in the marketplace is precisely this, which is abhorrent to the way design is understood in Europe.
True.
You will have some sort of thing that comes out in bold, yeah, extra bold. Then you will have slowly, in terms of point sizes, and you will slowly get to hierarchy of information. You will go from one to the other, and we say, "Oh boy, you know that's how perception works." And here you have the Indian chap who says, "My perception doesn't quite work that way. I'm quite able to handle these, yellows and greens. And look at our paintings. Look at the stuff, the way we dress up our gods. They call it garish. People are very happy with all that going on. And all bits and pieces happening, jangling and jingling and jangling. We have no problem, brother.
Yeah.
You know, priests, look at the way priests talk about religion. There you have a sermon, in 2 hours flat, he's got to deliver a certain message. Our Indian priests are, he's chanting away, not chanting away, sitting around there, doing this. You go there, hang out, pick it up from anywhere. And by the time 2 hours pass, you picked up a whole lot of other stuff in a very unstructured manner. And you thought, my goodness, I'm at peace. Right or wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
We are different. We are entirely different. And you mean design is not going to be impacted by all this?
It will be, of course. That becomes such an
Yeah.
important part of our
And
life.
have our design schools even begun to grapple with this? We talk of human centricity. We talk of user generated data. The foundations of user generated data, we are still looking at it through the perspective, through a Eurocentric perspective, the fundamentals of what we understand by quality. I spent years and years trying to understand what quality is, because of all these questions that, the way I'm speaking now, I
Hmm.
never always had this clarity. I was a hugely confused, anxious guy trying to come to grips with all of this stuff, going haywire. Many years of my life were spent like that. Today, I can say I have a certain clarity about things, because I don't hold on to perspectives. And I
Right.
know there is no objective reality. You know, I know that whatever is out there, my reality is my perception of that reality, which is dependent on hazard things, yeah.
True.
Starting from, where I was born, the kind of childhood I had, and all that shit that they taught me in school, all that has colored everything. Yeah. Today, when I look at something, it's through that lens, through that colored glass. So you're doing the same, I'm doing the same. That guy, outside village in Rajasthan is doing the same. Somebody in Imphal in the hills doing the same. So cool. So the moment I became cool with all of that, and I said, okay, if I'm going to start designing in these spaces, I cannot just say I'm going to work with user-centered data. It's not working with user-generated data anymore. All I can really, really do is catalyze the
Hmm.
forces within that community to generate their own solutions. That's where I'm at now.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, being a designer, I've taken it completely out of myself.
Hmm.
You know, what I try to do with you guys in a design research class, I try to do the same thing with communities and with corporations. I am not going to make a product for you and you're going to develop it and somebody else is going to sell it. We are all going to get into these spaces and some co-creation is going to happen between all these forces, and hopefully at the end of it we'll come to some sort of a solution which works for whatever the demographic.
Hmm.
And today the demographic is not necessarily a geographical one. It is a
Yeah.
cultural demographic, a social demographic, an economic demographic, a perceptual demographic, you know. So even that idea of those demographics need to keep changing, For example, you can have somebody who's in New York and somebody who's in Mumbai, and in
Hmm.
terms of this kind of perception be on the same wavelength. On the other hand, you can have one person in Bandra and another person in Dharavi having a completely different expectation of the world.
Yeah.
So when we talk of design, at the end of the day, what is it that we do? We have to be clear about it. I am increasingly looking at myself as somebody who can facilitate with the tools that I have,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
are mainly tools that have to do with understanding of how humans are, human centered stuff is, the some bits and pieces of the iterative processes, perception processes, sensory processes, understanding of emotional, the whole empathy thing to some extent. Can I, with these tools, get amongst my user group and start to interact with them so that everyone together can come up with something that makes things better for them?
Right. So it is very co-creational that way.
Yeah. So, so these for this last several years, I've been working really with multidisciplinary teams, and that's a start. Listen, I'm still not amongst the end users,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
am amongst multidisciplinary teams within the corporation. You know, so it's a little more broad based. But ideally, which is really you guys and the next generation, you'll be doing this amongst users, right out there. You'll be co-creating out there in the community. in the demographic space. And there will be enough segmentation of services and product offerings simply because the physical product is no longer necessary. It's going to be all so very much in the cognitive space that your offerings can encompass demographies, at a global scale,
Yeah,
but those
right.
will have to be pretty well defined. What the demographics in terms of, the perceptions, in terms of expectations, in terms of, the way the cognitive equipment works, all of that, you'll be making distinctions there.
And we're already working towards understanding that more. So
Yeah, because
yeah,
UI has got to do that.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
now, even in the digital world, a lot of it is dependent on that.
Hmm. So we'll have more
We
clarity
still
as
haven't
to
got. Pardon?
no, continue.
No, I mean, for example, when I start to boot my computer,
Mhm.
the first thing it should ask me is, today, do you want a, you know, are you from Japan? Is your culture Japanese? Would you like that kind of a, way of interacting with me? Or the computer should ask, or do you feel like being a, somebody from the Middle East or somebody from Europe? That should be the first stage of
Right. It'll
interaction.
become very fluid that way. It'll just be
And it
about
will happen. Trust me, it's going to happen. It's going
yeah.
to happen faster than you think.
Hmm.
Certainly before you my age.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you think then people my age or the coming generation sort of can understand or adapt to that change in thinking and how we look at designing with people?
No, I think there are some pretty deep differences between your generation and, preceding ones, because yours is probably the first generation which has always been in a digital world.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in 99, which is, yeah, so
90.
99.
Yeah, but by the time you
By the
got.
time I reached my teens, I was interacting with computers, phones,
Yeah,
and all
so
that
that's
was happening.
increasingly going to be like that.
Yeah,
So the whole thing about there has to be a bunch of physical products there which deliver function will soon be out of the window.
true, true.
So moment that happens, you have a different kind of a human being out there. I mean, look at how you all do your banking, your shopping, your entertainment, even your commuting. It's so much more fluid. Your expectations from your from your society, your expectations from your surroundings, is so different.
Hmm.
I take away your phone connection for a few hours and you sunk, man, right? Because your
Yeah, there's nothing
expectation with that
left.
is so much. Yeah.
There's nothing left
Just
apart
imagine
from
a time
myself.
where there's no more currency. This currency thing, we still got rupees and that the thing going on. 5 years
Yeah,
down the line, that's going to disappear,
yeah.
right?
So
It's going to
yeah,
be totally digital. And
yes,
imagine if for a few hours, कोई breakdown हो गया, no, we've got to have some other fail-safe system which will have a backup there, And I don't think my generation would be able to even imagine what that fail-safe system is going to be. I can't begin to imagine. But you guys are going to have to develop those systems, right? Which are
yeah.
alternatives. I mean, you're going to say, I give you, your problem is going to be like, what if the whole internet collapses? What happens to my transactions? What happens to my shopping? Because there is no physical
My
places left.
identity as a person, like everything comes at stake then. Like, I mean, I think because
So,
everything's
so it's
on
not
that
like the
internet.
world is going to collapse around you. You guys are going to develop, a way to keep things going, isn't it? It's not like humanity is
Yeah,
coming to an end.
yeah,
It's not. I mean, from my point of view, humanity is coming to an end. But that's because I don't have the imagination to deal with it. But for you, it won't be. Your world will have taken into consideration that this thing. In that sense, your world will be a very different world, you know, and with very different people. I can well imagine it being populated by humanoids, who have as much as of a say in all of this as humans. You could be easily sitting around and having a chat with a humanoid at a very deep intellectual level, and the guy probably knows more than you do.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got a
I
mind
was
crisper than yours. Or you could have even an emotional interaction with a humanoid, and the guy goes deep from you.
Yeah, because right now it's still a separate thing. Like the tech and me are still separate. There's no the integration hasn't happened with the
Yeah,
biology and the tech. So once that happens, I think we'll be upgrading to some other level.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
we'll be gods, I
So in
think.
that sense, if you look at what the future, I mean, it's obviously a future that your generation is going to be more equipped to deal with than any previous generation, and subsequent generations. Of course, it become
Right. So, but then the that's something. Okay, but then there's the same level of uncertainty there. So I mean, my point is, how do we adapt to that? How do we sort of or that's gonna happen by itself as we move
yeah,
along and try to change and I mean keep that learning aspect alive.
yeah. Well, I think understanding that the main constant that you have in all of this is that there is going to be change, and there is going to be change at an unprecedented level.
Right.
Simply because this is accelerating to a very high acceleration is taking place. And once you see things that way, and you don't hang on to certainty the way your parents and your grandparents do,
Hmm.
then I think your mind becomes something else.
Right.
I think human beings are getting there. That certainty thing isn't a big deal here. It's a
Hmm.
big block, and it was very useful for those people who lived in tiny villages, and going in your whole lifetime you didn't travel 100 kilometers out.
Right.
Then you needed the certainty. You had to do what your grandfather did, and that's what you learned to do, because it's always been like that. That was the kind of human being you became.
True.
But
True.
and human beings are, I mean, they adapt. the,
Hmm. Hmm.
the next generation is going to be the opposite of that. Uncertainty is going to be part of is what they do best. I think that's number one. And
Right.
that automatically gives rise to a certain kind of learning, or a certain kind of way of dealing with the world, that depends on learning to think things through, and knowing that in your arsenal you haven't got quite the same experience from earlier on.
Hmm.
Because a lot of us fall back on our experiences to solve
Right.
problems.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
you grow older, it becomes more common.
Whereas in this case, we'll have to dive into that uncertainty, that ambiguous space, and figure it out. I mean, it's a different
Yeah.
game
With an
altogether.
openness of mind.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
not just openness of mind, with an openness of heart, with an
right.
openness of spirit. You know, that's important.
So, I think back then, at least in the 60s, we still had like a clear vision as to why the institute was NID per se existed, and it had a sense of responsibility. And recently, we're coming up with new institutes. There are 5 institutes now which are in place, which don't have a clear vision or a responsibility in term formally, at least formulated by people. So, what do you think their role could be in terms of training students uh, and preparing them for
The
the coming years?
educator's role, institutional
Yes.
role.
Yes.
I think institutions, at least some of the more forward-looking ones, are grappling with this. I also think that education will not be the same as it has been so far. Increasingly, we will be looking at education as not being tied to a brick and mortar place.
Mm-hmm.
Already I think a great deal of your education uh, does not is not dependent on your teachers or in the college you go to.
Yes, yes.
And I think this is going to become more and more, is going to grow in that direction to much more. So you can well visualize a time when, for example, you can sitting in one place, access courses from the best data banks of this kind of knowledge. Something
Hmm.
developed at MIT, something developed at you know somewhere else, something developed in you don't have to join NID to get the kind of thinking that they have. It should be available to you. It probably will be available to you.
Things are already free and in terms of information.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I think we're all in flux, and this is is going heading there. It's
hmm.
not going to be any. And I think this what's happening these days. Is teaching us some real lessons real quick. Already we are seeing, for example, some of the things that I'm doing online, is very, very interesting with students. Of course, we miss the face-to-face interaction and all of that,
Hmm.
but one compensates in many other ways. In a digital thing, there are some other things that happen. Of course, we'll have to find a happy mix somewhere. There's no reason to think that uh, I can't be physically present in your with you in in Andhra Pradesh. you know
Yeah.
you've seen that experiment. Who was that? uh, what is that? I saw one fantastic one. This guy, out of this gadget, he clones an image
Oh,
of
okay.
himself
Like holographically projecting.
holographically, and
Yeah.
mind you, it translates or it talks in whichever language you're comfortable in.
Hmm.
I'm saying something in English here, and if you want to hear it in Japanese, that holographic image sitting there in
We'll
Vijayawada
do that. Yeah.
will do it in Japanese for you. Now imagine what happens there. And at one point, the difference will be not much. You won't really be able to make out that that guy is not me unless you start to shake my hand, which is not really necessary.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then everything else will kind of be mirrored.
Right.
You're
So,
very close to this. You're very
so
close to this.
Deepankar, then if we're completely diving into a space which has so many variables which that we're still figuring it out, then how do you, because but our minds have been trained or have developed in a different way for these years, like for millions of years. So then what do you think, are we going to have a different set of psychological or cognitive problems that way, maybe,
I think so.
because there's going to be a transition. So
Yes, I think
and
so. I think embracing uncertainty,
hmm,
understanding
yeah.
that chaos is really the key to most things. At a very deep level, and understanding that the markers which define your perception or define what is right and wrong, what is desirable, and those need to be jettisoned. They really change according to the circumstances.
Right.
I'm not talking of what is fundamentally immoral and immoral. Those are different questions. I'm not equipped to even go
Huh.
there. But what
Yeah.
is right in terms of for a problem solver? In
Hmm.
terms of problem solving. That I'm talking at that level. I'm not
Yeah.
talking at the deep levels of ethics and morality,
Yeah,
because I
understood.
think
Yeah.
some fundamental questions will need to be asked and answered. Moment you start, and we will begin to do this, messing about with the genes of newborn children.
Already doing that, and we can do it to upgrade ourselves or
Yeah. At what point and how are you going to make decisions there?
very great, I
Yeah.
think.
So there's some fundamental stuff that's going to change for someone being, who's going to be born 20, 30, 50 years down the line. That person is going to be unrecognizable in those terms for you and me. In that
True.
sense, we're all going to be aliens,
Yeah.
I think.
But even I see, I mean, I'm a 99 born child, but even when I interact with people who just 2 years younger to me, there's a difference in the jargon we use. There's a difference in
Wow.
what we, everything's changed. Like there's a slight change in their way of looking at things. So the change is way too fast. Like it's now with every year or every,
Yeah.
it's much faster. I can relate to that. Yeah.
Wow, absolutely. Exactly. That's exactly what's happening. And frankly, your generation is much better prepared than the previous generations. And subsequent generations will be even more prepared.
Right. Right.
Because you are growing up at a much, with this rate of change,
Yeah.
which preceding generation, I mean, your grandfather's generation, for example, you know, also saw a great deal of change. You must agree, because with all
Yes.
those things. But your great grandfather's generation was much slower.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
They very little change from birth to death.
Hmm. Hmm.
In terms of the markers, the reality didn't change all that much. Your grandparents' generation they changed quite a lot.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
imagine the aeroplanes when they were born.
Television,
There was no such thing as
aeroplanes.
an aeroplane.
Yeah, and telephones and
All of them.
televisions and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, and even now they're dealing with phones. So it's,
So
yeah,
imagine for them,
yeah, it's
that
a
thing that
huge.
happened over,
Yeah,
70, 80 years, for the coming generations, that's going to happen like that. The same kind of
yeah,
change, will
right.
happen maybe in 5 years, 2 years, 3 years. So by the time 70, 80 years pass, you'll be looking at, I mean, I have no idea, dude. I have no idea. I can't even begin to imagine it.
So it's like a tribal lifestyle where you are where you camp for a while in a different, in a headspace. You live a life in a
Yeah,
certain
that's a
way,
nice way of putting it.
and then as things change, you change yourself, you revamp yourself, and you're like, now I go into this place or in this headspace. Maybe I think
That's an
that's not
interesting way of putting it.
that's not from coming from me. That's Yuva Noah Harari. I think that's where I picked it up from. But yeah, it's, I think it helps you to understand, I think, how it can be like, I think. Yeah.
So, what do you think is going to happen to design under these circumstances?
um I think, as you mentioned already, it's something that is embedded in all of us already, in terms of understanding problems. It's just a matter of realizing how to go about it, how to drawing those relations and uh, coming up with things that can optimize it. I think all that rudimentary understanding of even people and how they respond, since we'll have that over the years, we'll already know how people respond to certain things, and there's going to be a sense of predictability, even in terms of cognitive reaction. So uh, I don't know what exactly a designer per se would do. Maybe people themselves could come up with things that can resolve the set of problems they're dealing with. It's because it's going to be so customized, so niche to you, that there's not a holistic answer to even five people living in different houses. Maybe they're
Yeah.
all dealing with different things and different intangible things. So uh, and physical problems, but yeah, I think that's what I can make sense of right now.
So, do you think your education is preparing you for that?
No, but that's
What would
something.
you like? What would you like to have in your education?
I think uh, uh, this sense of instilling something in us that uh, mm, uh, I think something that helps me adapt, something that teaches me how to really change my thought process, dealing with that change, how to deal with that change, and not applying the same set of uh, thumb rules to dealing with problems. So, really understanding change, dealing with that, and coping with that, and having a very fluid sense of perspective towards everything. So, instilling that fluidity, that it's okay to change, go ahead, change. Like
Right,
it'll make you better for the times to come.
right.
So, because I think there's a lot of rigidity in terms of how we enter the institute, when we enter the institute, in terms of our morals and from what comes from our upbringing. And by the time we get out, it's barely changed. It's like, so I think the institute need to really help us unlearn that even more faster and drastically. And yeah, I think that.
So you expect your education to be able to deliver this to you while also preparing you for your livelihood. I mean, at the you still have to earn a living. So the skills have to be,
Yes, I think so, but very difficult to accommodate that in 4 years. I think
yes,
it becomes a challenge for them as well
yeah.
because you're dealing with the history of things, also dealing with present, and then you're supposed to train them for the future. Also, it's a lot, but
So are
maybe
you
we could
excited by
train
all
together.
this? Are you excited by all this?
Yeah, it's a lot of things happening all the time. So you are trying to make sense of anything that comes at you. You're not like, I won't look at this. You have to. You don't know. I mean, everything's so uh, what do you say, interconnected now that I would want to explore anything that comes at me. If I'm saying no to anything, it's almost inhibiting my growth and my adaptability to things. I don't want to be rigid to that.
Yeah.
So, or maybe that comes with age also. I think I'm just
No,
starting out.
many people get more rigid as they get older.
Yeah, so I don't
Mm,
want to keep that. I think that's
mm,
yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. But Deepankar, just another thing that um, when you say that the institutes in India are sort of lagging behind in terms of grappling with the change that is happening outside, do you think that's also because as an economy, as a just the demographics of the people living here is very different? Like we're technically still a third world.
Yeah.
So
No, I think things are pretty a little bit more complex than that. You
hmm,
know, when design education started, when I was a young man,
yeah.
you know, we and when I started to work, you know, there was no understanding of what design could deliver. You know, so I was not prepared for what was needed, and nobody really knew what was needed. So in the initial years, and it's not a small time, for for a long time, you know, I would go into this office and say, "Look, this is what I can do for you." I would first try and get through the door. I would try to get through the door and say, "This is what I can do for you." You know, so I don't think anyone from your generation is even prepared for that kind of rejection. The
Hmm.
number of times you get kicked out, you know, I don't think you're even prepared for it. So having that kind of an attitude,
Hmm.
you know, is very different than an institution producing a bunch of students to get employed at the end of it.
Employment can't be. I mean, can it be?
But that's unfortunately what's driving most design curriculum. in most of these schools, simply
Hmm.
because that's what the parents want for their children. One of the first questions parents ask is, will my child at the end of this be decently, gainfully employed?
That's been the question since we got into school. Ki I make it to a college so that I get an employment. So,
Yeah.
hmm.
While the early years of NID, simply because of that time and space, you see, all of us who joined there that first batch,
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
were mavericks in a way because none of us knew what the hell is happening. The
Yeah.
faculty didn't know what the hell was happening there.
Hmm.
I remember one of the first things Kumar Vyas, he was, he said, look, you all are our guinea pigs, and we are going to develop this program, and frankly, we're going to have a lot of fun, but we don't know, what we are going to be doing. Not really. He was very upfront about this.
He
And he
said
said,
that in
anyone who
the
wants to leave should do so now.
that was the
I think about
first.
three or four left. Yeah. But everyone else who hung around,
Hmm.
obviously our minds were geared differently. I mean, otherwise, I mean, those were the days when you either did engineering or medicine, or stuff like that, And here you have a bunch of guys and reasonably intelligent, bunch of people, who kind of were willing to kind of take a ride in unknown, you know, uncharted waters, so to speak. And in the early days, everything was so open-ended in NID,
Hmm.
exploration, getting into stuff with openness of mind, trying to open up our minds, trying to see the rigidity we already have. All of that was what we were doing. And that was also the time when the culture of NID was getting formed. And Gautam Sarabhai would have these weekly discussions with us.
Oh.
Uh, every Saturday
Hmm.
would be like that in the mornings, and
Okay.
where he would be chatting with us, and you'd be talking about things like you know the meaning of freedom, the meaning of responsibility, you know and that was the culture that was being formed over there was, um, for him, all voices needed to be heard. So my
Hmm.
16-year-old voice was as important, as that of an accomplished, much older guy. So that understanding that everybody's voice, everybody's perspective, regardless of what you think is mature, immature, this, that, and the other, we need to get a little bit past that. In that sense, Gautam Bhai was one hell of a human being. Gautam Saravai, we called him Gautam Bhai because he insisted on being called Gautam. Although he was older than my dad. And my generation was certainly were not used to it. This whole
Yeah.
first name thing for one. I mean,
Yeah.
most of the other faculty and all, the difference of age wasn't so much. Except guys
Right.
like Kumar and Dashrath and Helena, they were more like my father's generation.
Right. Right.
And Gautam was a little older than that also. And when he said, call me Gautam or Gautam Bhai or whatever, everybody else, we all got into that. And I think that thing continues with you guys. At least we tried it. All the us
Right.
old timers keep telling you, call us by our first names, please.
Yes.
So that was being also developed. This whole trying to be open to things, trying to explore things, trying to start from first fundamentals, trying to take nothing for granted, and experimental nature of learning. All that began to get developed there. One of the things he would, examples he would give us of, was a place called Summerhill. Summerhill was a similar experiment in the United Kingdom,
Okay.
where, for example, they believed that every student was different. So, for example, if you had a 10-year-old who walked in there and he preferred to just hang out in the lawns the whole day, they were quite okay with it. Simply because they thought that if this 10-year-old feels the need to do that at this particular time, then that must be right, and we got to respect it. you know. And if somebody got into a certain area and said, "This is what I want to do," at a young age, this is where you're being drawn to, they would allow it. So that kind of a thing, where one size doesn't fit, everybody, where people
Right.
would take off into different things, that kind of fluidity was very much there at NID. So much so that, we didn't even, our education was very unstructured because simply because they were still developing a curriculum. We learned
Hmm.
and did a lot of our learning from these projects. Because a lot of these fancy projects with these big names were happening all over. We
Like,
were plugged into some of those.
like.
For example, in 1972 was the first India International Trade Fair.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first time the trade fair opened up in Delhi. So there were three projects running out of NID. And for several months, we all got plugged into all of them. So it was quite crazy. One day I would be working with panels in an exhibition design scenario. The
Mm-hmm.
other day, a few weeks down the line, I would be on another thing, and they would tell me, that was the inside of this thing structure they had made, where we would have this audiovisual thing with 48 still, this slide screen and two or three project, this moving picture screens. And the whole thing
Mm.
was being coordinated through one computer, which today is not very much, but it was as big as a room
Oh,
in those
right.
days, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I was being asked to, from the inside, do a perspective drawing, and it was blowing my mind. I was at it for 3 days and nights trying to get a hang on. I mean, vanishing points, a hazard bloody vanishing points in there on the inside. At the end, I said, dude, I am so totally lost. Then a pro came and, he fixed it. And, and then I was watching him and learning. So this is the kind of learning we were having. Then we would be working with the, and this was a Czechoslovakian team, one of the best in the world. This was Yaroslav Frick, Yaroslav Frick's team,
Okay.
events and stuff like that they used to do all over the world. So this was his team. So first they traveled all over the country, shooting stuff. Essence of India. They were, recording on photographs and film and sounds. Then putting all this together, and they were about a dozen guys, maybe less than that. And their whole culture of doing, they didn't have workers like us. The other pavilions are Indian NIT teams. We had the designers, and you had a bunch of workers, and
Yeah.
and the factory. They were not like that. All of them would have this belt with the best tools in the world. That's their tool belt, and they would do that themselves.
Hmm.
They were not relying on Indian workers for anything. So that's another cultural shift. We were getting introduced to. You know.
And how were the faculties assisting you through these projects? Like,
So, pardon?
how were the faculties assisting you through these projects or the curriculum in general? What was
See,
there?
in my batch, the curriculum was sort of getting developed, and it was not really. That is why guys like me, we never really specialized.
Hmm.
I probably did as much of. I did cinema, I did graphic design, I did some product design.
Oh.
I worked in with plaster of Paris, and did some furniture, and generally pretty, because I had this thing in my head that if you got specialized, you weren't a designer. So, and in the earlier days of NID, they didn't really push you to kind of, they're okay with all of this. You took credits from various places, and they're cool with that kind of.
And
And
everybody was on
our
their own.
evaluation also was very different in the initial this thing. What we would do is we would do a project, and then
Mhm.
we would sort of put it up there and invite everybody, including people who are working on the machines in the workshops.
Right, right.
We're a small community.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
barely 25, 30, 50 people at the most. So all of them would come and, from various. So the department thing wasn't there,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know. So we were as familiar with what was happening in the product design thing as my textile design thing as, any. I mean, it doesn't matter. It didn't really matter.
But there wasn't a formal discipline,
Well,
like a
yes. They were beginning to become because you had these, we had what is this contact hours.
Contact towers.
Contact hours basically meant
Okay.
the faculty is available to you in person,
Oh, okay.
and the rest of the time was non-contact. You're on your own
Hmm, hmm,
doing
hmm.
your projects. But available to you didn't mean that guy was hanging around in the class. He was available to you maybe in his cabin, but he was available to you.
Yeah.
You could go and meet him in his cabin if you want. Once in a way, maybe if you're all working out there, he would come and make a chakkar, look around at everybody's thing. Then he would go back and disappear into his cabin or his project or whatever else he was doing. But these are the contact hours when this interaction was kind of mapped
Hmm.
into your curriculum.
So
This
when
was
you'd
there,
be,
then the working on those professional projects was there, and a lot of time was spent doing our own stuff. We picked up these projects, any kind of project it may be. And a lot of it was doing it on our own with this
right,
guidance from these contact hours coming in.
just picking up different things that are available at the institute and just figuring them
A
out.
lot of it was like that. We were like little sponges,
Hmm.
in that space where hazard things were happening, and I at least was like a sponge. I would go and sponge everything up. Whether it made sense or no sense, it didn't really matter to me. I was not much of a guy who needed to make sense of things, and I would be horrified if my world wasn't coming apart if things didn't make sense to me. I used to be very much in the moment kind of a guy. I used to
Hmm.
enjoy it, and
Hmm.
a lot of peer learning. A lot of peer learning.
Yeah, yeah.
Because a classmate of mine, he saw something in the library
Hmm.
from called sticks. A guy called Doxiadis was running something out of Greece, and for the
Hmm.
first time, he introduced us to this whole way of mapping your environment. You know, and it was probably one of the first attempts to do that anywhere in the world. And this whole thing, acoustics,
Oh.
this whole holistic way of looking at the world, that along with what Buckminster Fuller was writing, these were the things that spurred us on.
Hmm.
And these
Hmm.
things didn't come from the faculty. It came from our library. It bits and pieces came from the guys who would drop in and out. And because we were all committed learners, my batch was hugely experimental and hugely, I mean, getting into all kinds of places that one guy gets and finds something, he would come and share it with everybody else, and everybody else would, oh wow, spend the next week getting into that. We would be like that. And I think
Right.
what happens when your expectations from you is not that itna subjects khatam karo, itna ye evaluation hone wala hai. If that expectation is reduced, and you guys are
Hmm.
just let loose in an open space with all the facilities, mind you. We had top of the line workshops. All the equipment was available to us, and you could drop in there anytime. And you had these great guys, Hari Bhai and all, in the workshops, and learn with them. Learning about wood, learning about metals, learning about all of that and all those machines. It was all open. You could do it anytime. And another thing was the institute never shut.
Yeah, yeah.
We
You could
didn't,
walk in anytime.
yeah, and we didn't have this timing thing.
Hmm.
If there was a contact hour, you landed up,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
and you didn't need to leave.
Right.
Many times you would spend the whole night there, either doing you did something. Whether a straitjacketed guy would call it learning or not is a different thing altogether. But when kids hang out in a place and you got a bunch of curious minds, then you do something.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so it was that kind of a culture.
And
And mind you, each of us had humongous spaces because there's nobody else hanging around the
oh,
place. So, for
right,
example,
right.
I had a huge table. Next to me was a nice seating lounge area. So very flexible, and you could. And in the earliest days, you used to have one guy, morning and evening, come with tea, coffee, biscuits, all in the house, all in the house. And material, we didn't pay for materials, photo
Yeah.
paper, this, that, and the other, all in the house. because Ford Foundation, Big Daddy Ford Foundation, was still giving us money in those days.
Right.
That stopped with the next batch. Next batch didn't get all that much.
Okay, okay, okay.
The grant stopped.
And who were the people coming in from outside and taking these sessions?
We
Like
used to
what?
get all kinds of people. For instance, architect, you
Mm-hmm.
know, musicians,
Hmm.
dancers, designers, of course, thinkers, you know, there's somebody who's, running a museum somewhere, filmmakers, critics, and from all over. A lot of them accomplished Indians as well.
Right.
That didn't matter. The good guys, and I mind you, I didn't see the best of it. The guys who before the education thing started, they
Hmm.
saw much more of it because you had guys like Frutiga and Bob Gill and
Right.
Hoffman. Time there, I didn't get to really work with them. You know,
And the
they
Eames had
were.
left back then when
Yeah,
you joined.
students work with them. The guys who came in at they had already had a background in, either fine arts or applied art or literature or something like that, or architecture or something like that. And they work with these guys at NID, and then maybe at the school they were teaching in either, you know, in Germany or Switzerland or wherever, or in their offices. Some of it, spend some time there and then come back as faculty. So when my first year really, we had, Dashath, we had Kumar, and a little, we had Helena, who was a Finnish lady, and we had Ishu Patel,
Oh, yeah.
well-known animator.
Yeah.
These three guys were basically the Indian chaps,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a German guy, who used to teach perspective drawing. His name was uh, Zeliger, and there was two furniture designers. There was another German called Janisch and
Mm-hmm.
Zettler. This
Mm-hmm.
was the kind of crowd, and we had people, the people who were older, who had done engineering or who had done something else, the slightly older group, who were also finishing their this short 2 year courses. So those guys were there as well. you know. So Ranjan had joined about 10 months before I did, and he was doing one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
There was Sudarshan Khanna, and there was Balram and Bhandari. Those are these guys.
Yeah, yeah,
Then
yeah.
in my first year, Bhandari took off to spend a year with, I can't remember now, somebody's office in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So that this was the sort of thing that was happening, a constant flow of ideas coming in from around the world. Because these guys would do courses in various places, somebody in UCLA, somebody in the elsewhere, and they would come back and you get a flavor of that thing as well.
Right.
And I mean, I started to get a bit more of that structure a little later in the day because they were still doing their courses in various places. So
Mm-hmm.
my batches was very unstructured. You sort of picked up what you could. You know, but the subsequent batches, I think the second batch a little more, but third batch onward, you generally they had these guys were back and you know
It
they
was a little more structured and
they were properly brainwashed in the whole idea of what design, Eurocentric design. We were brainwashed in a kind of sideways kind of brainwashing. It wasn't structured shit. We got brainwashed in a different way.
right. But I think that also makes sense with coming back to where we are right now. I think how you experience the curriculum with a variety of things. I'm not sure how structured or how not so structured it can be, but I think that also makes sense because you get to do a bunch of things, and that. What do you think? Like, does that make sense right now? As in,
No, I think there are fundamental issues here. I
okay,
have been making curriculum for places as well.
okay,
So
okay,
I have seen it from various,
right.
various angles.
Hmm.
One fundamental thing is that preparing a student for the market,
Mm.
to start delivering in the marketplace. That has kind of taken over, you know. So this
Right.
open-ended education that I had
Mm.
has now become very, very tiny. So the amount of, I mean, just imagine this, just look at the thing that we have to give you. We have to teach you the, you know, so many subjects. We just have to give it to you. Because from day one, in your professional thing, you're going to have to use all that. Apart from the skills, you know, basic
Mm.
skills or basic, you know, the understanding of, you know, interacting with your technologies, the software
Mhm.
and all of that. You know, we need to, when you look at your courses, you know, your understanding of, you know, these projects are varying complexities, you know, like I think in product design, you come from product design background,
Communication.
communication. So there now in your communication, you're getting a bit of, you know, filmmaking, a bit of animation, a bit of graphic design.
Everything. Yeah.
All of that has to be given to you.
Yeah.
Now that takes time.
Yeah.
While for us, although there was a bit of that happening, we kind of soaked up, you know, as we went along and, you know, worked on these professional projects with, like apprentices almost, you know, at some level.
Mm. Mm.
I was kind of ready. It didn't make a difference. I was kind of ready. But mind you, I was ready simply because I was far ahead of the market in terms of what I was talking about.
Uh, Right. Right.
So
Right.
expectations from the market, I mean, like the kind of things I was talking about, and you walk into one of these, you know, advertising agencies and you talk to them, their eyes would go like that because they were staffed by all these chaps coming out of Baroda and JJ school who were really, you know, 19th century education they had.
Right. Right.
So it's like, amongst a bunch of blind people, a one-eyed guy is king.
Andho mein kana raja. What do
Now,
we?
y'all are not going to work in that kind of. The clients today are very much more sophisticated. They're very much more
Mm.
aware. They know what
Mm.
is happening around the world. Expectations are there, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole system there, you know, which
Right.
is a design ecosystem, which is established. You're going to have to know the basics of that if you're going to be, if you're going to get employment.
Hmm.
You know,
So do you
and that's
think?
the reason we give you things like internships and all right from, you know, second year
Right.
or what.
So do you think changing the duration of the program, like from 4 to maybe 5, does that make sense, or that just slows down
They
things?
reduced it from 5.5 to 5 to 4. You know, and now the whole thinking is that you have various levels at which you can get out. You can get out after 3, you can get out after 4, and you pick up a diploma or that whatever thing is saying that you've done that. You know, because not everybody is able to even finish that for various reasons, and I think economic reasons do,
Yeah.
count. No, for various reasons. There could be many hazard reasons. So that
Yeah.
flexibility is going to come in definitely. But you know, this whole, this open-endedness of things, you
Hmm.
know, even if that thing shifts to the school level,
Mm-hmm.
will be good because at these professional course levels,
Hmm.
we just do have to give you these skills, and that is going to take 3 years, 4 years of your time. As
Right.
complexity increases, we are going to have to give you more of this. So hopefully, all the other stuff, you know, starts off in school. Instead of
Yeah. The
literally
schools.
teaching you history, geography, and God knows what else unnecessary, you know, stuff. You know, if you can
Yeah.
do all the other stuff, you know, that whole opening up, inquiry,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
stuff in school. And mind you, a 5-year-old is much better at that than any 18-year-old in any case. So the
Yes.
idea is not to
Yes.
lose it.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that way we can invest a lot of time in schools
yeah.
before we come
And
to
with
college.
that mindset, if you come to a design school, then I
Mm.
think you will look at the curriculum also very differently.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think it will be very much easier for everyone, you know, except for the teachers because they won't know what to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, overall, I mean, things are changing, and it's a slow pace of change. You know, everything dovetails together: the curriculum, the faculty, the background of the faculty, the
Hmm.
amount of faculty with, work experience. Like I didn't think of teaching before I was 40 years old, 45 years old, 40, 45.
So how come that
I
uh,
was so busy in the, I ran my own firm called Images Company, setting all that up, working on pro projects,
hmm?
and then when I turned about 45-ish, yeah, around 40, 40 something, 40 and 45 ke beech mein, somewhere around there, that people used to call me for little workshops there, and that's when I started to get into that,
Hmm.
and it wasn't till I became 55 that Kumar asked, I had a chat with Kumar, and he said, "Why don't you come and take a look at the kind of the curriculum at MIT Institute of Design?"
Hmm.
Until then, I was not employed by anybody. I was on my own and running my own farm or freelance before that, whatever. And that was my first decent employment, where I would get paid every month, and I didn't have to pay other people. And I was already 55 years old. I came to Pune. That was 11 years ago. And that
Right.
was my first stint of proper in an educational environment and institution and all of that. But they treated me very well. They gave me a cabin and left me alone and said, "Do your own thing." I mean, Kumar's name was pretty good,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I hadn't applied for the job. I got
Right.
applied for it. So I was invited for it. It's not that they can fish out any application from me in their files. It's not there. You know, Kumar recommended. They called me. We had a chat, and I was in.
Right.
Yeah. So there was nothing. So it was
And
pretty cool.
then how do you think how we can change the faculties, as in how can we train them, as in
See, things are very much. I mean, I'm a guy like me would be
Mhm.
unemployable. I mean, all that structure thing is not there. I've never applied for a job anywhere. Things have
Mhm.
just happened to me because of I don't know why. Frankly, like this, how I came into education today. A guy can't step into an institute, without being half a PhD
Yeah,
or a
yeah.
full PhD.
Mm.
He won't be allowed to take a class. And here I am, this guy who's got nothing yet, who's been doing stuff in the professional space. I got called in by Kumar, who happened to be Big Daddy in those days. And voila, I become a teacher
So no, my question
and
was
develop
Deepak.
curriculum and whatnot. Now that's
Yeah.
unthinkable.
So
Indeed.
Deepankar, my question is ki like how we talked about institutes and students. So we also need people how who train these or who teach at these institutes. So do you think we need to shift that as well or change the way that
Yeah,
works?
in NID we had
Hmm.
one maverick like this called Dashrath Patel.
Hmm.
Dashrath Patel was like this. He wouldn't take a structured nothing. But he would be hanging out there, and we would be hanging around with him, and he would allow these absolutely deep one-liners, which would set you thinking for a week. He would see some. I mean, he was a great guy, very
Hmm.
deep, very wise, and hugely experienced. He traveled, knew everybody all over Europe and the United States. I think when he joined, he with Ford Foundation backing, he spent a couple of years going around the world meeting everybody, all the top artists, all the top designers, all the top everybody. He went and spent time with everybody. And in NID, he didn't have, they didn't straight jacket him and tell him, take so many classes, do this, hit pay and the other. They gave him the kind of freedom that I got also in my working life. These
Right.
institutions have given me the same kind of thing. I think every institution needs one or two of these mavericks, who don't get
Yeah.
structured too much. And in MIT Institute of Design, they would never burden me with anything. They would always put another younger guy with me, and he
Hmm.
would kind of do the day-to-day. There is a lot of day-to-day stuff that
Yeah. True.
teachers got to
True.
do with students. Now, I've been very lucky that I didn't, that they thought that I was offering something, that's needed, and they had others who would, and everybody together we would be able to deliver something. But increasingly, I see institutions don't want to do that. I'm still luckily in places where, and now I'm not employed anyway. But being employed and doing that, I don't think is possible anymore. That
Right.
MIT in the initial years was the last place where that could happen, and mainly because it was set up by Kumar. In those early years, they were very flexible and they wanted to learn, they wanted to do this. They've also become very rigid now. And the NIDs, of course, have become total Sarkari daftars. Sorry to say this, but
Yeah, that's how it is. That's how it is. Yeah.
yeah. And the bureaucracy can't handle this.
Hmm.
They can't handle ambiguity like this, man.
Yeah.
They got to know what you're doing. They got to understand it. You got to put it down in writing, and get a grant for it. You can't leave it open-ended.
Hmm.
While NID in the old days was so open-ended, and that's for students, faculty, everybody. Like Sudarshan Khanna was started this toy thing. He didn't kind of start with a structured thing. He just got interested, kept doing, kept doing. At the end of it, he had a great course. He drove toy design in India. But that didn't happen overnight. It took him a long
Yeah.
time to do that.
Yeah.
You know, he was quite old by the time it became a curriculum and a course and whatnot. Similarly, with many guys who were like that, because they had the freedom and they were not pressured to deliver on, like teachers today are.
Hmm.
Today, teachers are so pressured. They have the kind of paperwork that they have, or ERP work these days. You know, it
What,
takes
what, what,
6 hours every day for them to, do all that ERP feeding and stuff here. All of
right.
that. Now, one of those teachers comes and said, look, for 10 days, next 10 days, I'm not going to even touch my ERP and computer. I'm going to hang out in the workshop. I'm going to develop this thing. Is going to be able to do that today?
No.
Our teachers did it all the time.
Hmm.
So these are fundamentals, And I think an institution makes up its mind at one point where it's going to be,
Right. Right. Hmm.
and where it can afford to be.
Hmm.
Nothing that's backed by the Sarkari or by private money can afford to do this because they are result oriented and they need the numbers, and the numbers come when your output is beginning to earn money. And how does that happen? By structure. Structure is key.
Hmm. Yeah. Makes sense.
So, it really, the students, I think, need to take things in their own hands and do this thing while maintaining a completely independent life, which is doing the other stuff and picking up things from around the world. Because expecting it from an institution and all in one place is, in today's times, impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
NID early years was an anomaly. When I talk to some people anywhere in the world, they say that didn't happen anywhere. It's just circumstances, that time, that space, that a bunch of guys with that kind of a vision, and giving that space for those first few years with no expectation of returns before the real bureaucracy stepped in and started to say, "Oh my God, ye kya ho kya raha hai, yaar? These guys better start making sense now." Before all that, there was a good 10, 15 years when there were no such expectations. And that time was when these fundas grew out there.
Hmm.
The seeds were there. Of course, a lot of it was, idealism and dreams. But so what? I mean, dreams is what a lot of the dreams have come true for many of us. The fact that we are talking now is because some of that culture has, even now it's existing, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Came because of that
It's
pressure.
still alive. I mean,
Still
in some
alive.
way.
It's just changed, and it's becoming more and more structured. True, but that essence is, hopefully, is there. Of course, is there.
Hmm.
That's the
Hmm.
whole thing. And now to make another complete way, you need another institution like that, but in a completely different setting, completely different times. You know, But I don't know. May happen.
So I think all we can as students expect is time and space and resources to an extent from an
Yeah.
institute.
Yeah,
And
we
then
were lucky. We had Ford Foundation giving us all of that stuff.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
was huge. Looking back, that's a lot of investment. And that was a time in India's history also.
Yes, the whole political environment
Post-colonial,
was different back then.
Nehruvian vision. We
Yeah.
wanted to get into the modernity,
Mm.
modernism,
Yes.
and a lot of the internal strife was being stifled. You know, I mean, that's why it was much later that the internal, disagreement surfaced, and that is why, with all the, the what the RSS wanted, the what the Samajwadi Party wanted, what the
Yeah.
various other who represented other kinds of thinking, all that
Right.
that time was really suppressed. It
Right.
was a very, very, European centric way of modernism that we were trying to get into because we thought that would work.
Hmm, hmm,
And
hmm,
those
hmm.
initial years, we were doing that. Space was being given for that. You know, if you look at the basics of all these institutions, School of Architecture, Delhi, NID, School of Planning in Ahmedabad, SEPT, and that satellite thing,
Yeah.
and you had the IITs, Institute of Sciences, huge freedom at the beginning to chart their own course, keeping expectations low. That is why they had the time and space to grow their ethos. Today's institutions don't have that time and space to do that. They have to deliver from day one. Too many pressures. Financial pressures are huge.
Hmm.
Young countries is a they're no longer any more young countries. You know, and having to bridge that huge chasm. Yes,
Right.
we had in India living in the 16th century, major parts of India living in the 16th century. We still do, but that time it was far bigger. And you had these pockets of 20th century,
Yeah.
and there was this attempt to bridge gaps. Whether it worked or not is a different question. I mean,
Hmm.
history will tell us what happened and how much casualties were there. But it was happening. Metropolises were being built. Chandigarh was being built.
Hmm.
These are all different ideas that was becoming real. No? Skyscrapers were being built. So all that.
Yeah, so the political and economic and the social everything, the environment is completely different.
Yeah,
So as an institute and as institutes, the the responsibility, everything was different. Like way of functioning was different.
true.
So yeah, and now it's different in a yeah,
Different challenges, new
yeah.
challenges, and a lot of it is, how the current generation of people they're also doing their best. They're also, working to with these challenges,
Hmm.
and they have their ideas as to how this happened. You know, like we developed our ideas, they have developed their ideas in a different context.
Yeah, yeah. Cool.
So it's a process of evolving realities.
Charlie, thank you, Deepankar. I
It's
think
been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure. Wonderful talking with you.
wonderful talking to you too. It was, I
Great to
think
do this with more people. It'd be nice
yes,
to have.
we plan to, and we're trying to reach out to as many people, as many faculties and designers and
Yeah,
non-designers, just people
yeah.
who are practicing right now.
Wonderful, wonderful, very good initiative, I must say. Very
Thank
good
you.
to see this.
Yes, and I hope we do this often and stay in touch.
Yes,
And
absolutely. I'd love to do that. Love to keep in touch with you.
yes, that'll be great.
Absolutely wonderful.
Chaliye.
Good speaking with you.
Yes, you too. Take care.
You
Thank you
too.
so much for your time, and
It's been a
we'll
pleasure.
see you
It's an
soon.
absolute pleasure.
Yes, yes, it's been a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.